The forest around her was deep and endless, and full of sounds that were not really sounds, just small shifts in the leaves, small rustles in the air. Small cracks that came from nowhere and disappeared just as fast, and Rhea moved through it with careful steps, her boots soft against the moss, her breathing steady, just like her grandpa taught her back on Earth, where the forests were different but still alive in their own quiet way, and she remembered his voice like it was right beside her. Even now, a low, strong voice that always seemed to know what to do in the wild. He used to say the trick wasn't about hiding or fighting or running. It was about becoming part of the forest, listening to it, respecting it, and above all else, never a Wells. Never showing fear, because fear makes you loud and the forest hates loud things, especially the ones that pretend to be brave, but are really just scared inside. And she remembered the way he would take her out when she was just a kid into the thick trees. Behind his cabin, carrying nothing but a knife, a blanket, and a small compass tied to a string, they would walk for hours, not talking, just listening to the world around them. And when they stopped, he would sit her down and teach her things that weren't in any book, like how moss always grows on the side that sleeps in the shade, or how some birds repeat the same warning calls again and again when something is stalking below them, or how a still forest is sometimes more dangerous than a noisy one, because it means everything else is already hiding. She was 9 the first time. They got caught in a sudden storm deep in the Smoky Mountains far from the trail, and the rain came down so hard it was like standing in a waterfall, and lightning cracked the sky and thunder shook the earth, and she had cried, but he never raised his voice. He just led her to a rock ledge, and they waited. He made a small fire without matches, just using a flint and some dry bark he had saved in a tin, and she watched him and tried to stop crying, and he said something she never forgot. Forest is just like people. It only bites when it's scared or when you make it angry, so don't give it a reason to do either that. Night stuck with her forever, and now walking through an alien jungle that had eaten more than 100 soldiers, she remembered it clearly, because everything around her felt like it was watching, like it was holding itself back, like it was waiting for a reason to strike. She passed a thick tree with bark that looked like cracked stone, its roots twisted around a pile of bones, not human, but large and hollow and clean, like they had been picked dry without a trace of blood. And she didn't stop to examine them. She didn't pull out her scanner or her tablet. She just kept walking at the same slow pace, because she knew the jungle was watching and testing and reacting to every moving. Her bag was a small journal, her grandpa's journal, old and full of dirt-smudged pages covered in his handwriting. Some pages had drawings of traps, others had maps of local forests, others had short lessons like move slower than the wind or fire is your last resort, not your first. And she had read it cover to cover so many times that she didn't need to look at it anymore, but she still carried it because it felt like he was with her. She came to a small stream, the water dark and slow with roots dipping into it like fingers, and she knelt beside it, not to drink but to watch. And she saw that the water wasn't moving right. It shifted against the current in places, like something was pulsing beneath it like veins, and she didn't step in. She walked along the edge until she found a place where small fish swam freely, without changing direction, and that was where she crossed, jumping from stone to stone. Keeping her hands out for balance, never touching the roots, she marked a tree with a small symbol, her own mark. 3 lines in a triangle pointing forward, just like Grandpa taught her not to leave signs for others, but to remind herself where she had been in case she needed to retrace her steps. And as she moved deeper, the air grew thicker, more humid, more full of the strange energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up like static, and she knew she was getting close to something important, something the jungle didn't want her to see. Trees were taller here, darker, their branches woven together so tightly that only specks of light reached. The ground and even the sounds were less now, less rustling, less movement, like the jungle was holding its breath again, and she remembered. Another lesson from the journal: when the woods go silent, it means something is hunting. She slowed even more, crouching slightly, lowering her center, stepping between roots with soft, careful movements, and then she saw it through the trees, a structure old, an overgrown metal and stone covered in moss and vines, The remains of an old research station, maybe. The first one that had landed here before the death started, before the jungle turned deadly. Shay didn't rush in. She circled it once, staying in the shadows and watching for signs of movement. And then she stepped inside through a broken doorway. Stepping over shattered glass and twisted metal, and her eyes adjusted to the dim light inside. It smelled like rust and damp earth, and there were signs of a struggle overturned. Chairs broken, screens claw marks maybe, but not from an animal. They were too clean to straight, and she found a half-burned notebook, pages torn and charred. But one message clear at the top: it's not a jungle, it's a brain. She stared at that sentence, heart pounding just a little faster now because it matched what she had started to believe: the vines, the roots, the shifting paths. The way it reacted to sound and motion. It wasn't just a forest, it was something alive in a way no one understood. Not just alive, but intelligent. She took the notebook and placed it in her bag, then paused as she heard it again. A soft voice, weak and scared, whispering from deeper in the structure. Please don't let it hear. Mesh turned slowly, following the sound through a narrow hallway where the ceiling had collapsed in places and the floor was slick with moss and mud, and she found him crouched in the corner, an alien scientist with pale blue skin and wide, fearful eyes, wrapped in a tattered survival blanket. His leg bent at a strange angle, dried blood on his hands and face. He looked up at her as if he wasn't sure she was real, and she knelt beside him, quietly placing a finger to her lips, and he nodded. They didn't send help, he whispered. They sent bait. She didn't speak, just nodded again, and slowly pulled a small water pouch from her bag, holding it out to him, and he drank in small, careful sips, his hands shaking it. Learns, he said, it remembers each team. Each pattern, it uses what it sees to make traps that fit, and now it's waiting for something. Knew something it hasn't seen before? Ia didn't answer right away. She just listened to the jungle outside, to the way the vines creaked, to the way the trees shifted ever so slightly, and she knew the forest had already seen her, had already started trying to figure her out. She would not make the same mistakes. She would not run. She would not panic. She would use her grandpa's trick, a trick that wasn't really a trick at all. The trick was being part of the wild, not separate from it. The trick was listening before acting, moving only when needed, breathing with the rhythm of the earth. And maybe, just maybe, the jungle wouldn't understand that, wouldn't be able to learn it fast, and now wouldn't know how to fight someone who wasn't fighting. Had Al-Shi helped the scientist to his feet, and together they began to move back into the trees, back into the breathing, shifting green heart of the world. And the jungle watched, curious now, because for the first time someone wasn't playing by the rules, and it didn't like not knowing how to win. The forest was not quiet anymore. It was not loud either, but it was different, alive in a new way. Not with animals or birds or wind, but with awareness, like it had opened its eyes and was watching every step they took, and Rhea could feel it in her bones. Not fear, but pressure, like walking through thick water, or like being underwater, where every move echoes and the world waits to respond. And the alien scientist limped beside her, barely able to stand, leaning on a broken branch as a cane, his skin pale and sweating, but his eyes sharp with terror. He had been in the jungle for 5 days, he said. No food, no water, hiding in small spaces, barely breathing while vines searched for him, curling through cracks, sliding along the floors, tasting the air. And it only left him alone when he stopped moving, when he slowed his heart and lay perfectly still, and even then it stayed close, like it was waiting for him to make a mistake. And when Rhea asked how he survived this long, he said one word: luck. But Rhea didn't believe in luck. Not here, not in a place like this. She believed in rhythm and balance and stillness, and she moved through the jungle like she belonged there, not fast, not slow, steady, never brushing against leaves, never kicking loose stones, always moving like part of the forest instead of a stranger in it. The forest responded in kind, not with kindness, but with confusion, like a predator seeing something it couldn't categorize. It knew soldiers, it knew scanners, and shouting and fire, but it didn't know her, didn't understand her path, didn't see her as prey yet. They stopped at the base of a large twisted tree, one of the oldest in the jungle, with thick roots curling into the ground like claws, and she helped the scientist sit, leaning him against the bark, which pulsed faintly under his back, as if alive with breath. He flinched and looked up, afraid it would swallow him. But she shook her head and told him to listen, not with his ears, but with his body. Feel the forest, feel its pattern, every vine, every breeze, every twitch in the leaves. It's a language, she said, one we're not used to, but it's there. He tried, and slowly his breathing calmed and the shaking in his hands faded, and he looked around, not with panic, but with caution, and he said, I think it's hunting something else. And Rhea nodded. Diaz, it's hunting me, because she had done something no one else had done. She had walked into its territory without fear, without noise, without violence. And she had seen its patterns, seen the way it struck, the way it reacted, the way it learned. She knew now that the jungle didn't just react to motion or heat or sound, it reacted to behavior. It studied emotions, so she gave it something to listen to. She took a small audio device from her bag and placed it behind a rock 20 feet away and played a simple loop, footsteps and soft muttering human sounds, the kind any tired explorer might make, and then she walked away, pulling the scientist with her. Hiding behind thick vines and whiting the vines around the rock, moved first, not fast, but curious. They crept forward like snakes, testing the air, and then one struck, lashing at the rock with sudden speed, smashing it apart, as if expecting something to be there when there was nothing but the device. It recoiled and hissed, not in anger, but in disappointment. Rhea smiled, because now she knew how it hunted on, how to use that against it. She created another loop, this time footsteps, running, gasping a voice, crying out for help, and placed it near a clearing. Then another loop of static and clicks like malfunctioning tech. Then another of heavy breathing. Each time the jungle attacked, fast and hard and wrong, every time wasting energy, every time growing more restless, more unsure. Sure was changing the pattern. She was rewriting the hunt. The scientist watched her with wide eyes as she set up decoy after decoy. You're confusing it, he said. It's not used to failure. Good, she said. Let it think I'm chaos. Let it waste time trying to understand. They moved again, deeper, toward the signal beacon, the one the lost team had activated before they vanished, and the closer they got, the stranger the jungle became. The trees were too close together, their trunks bent toward each other like they were whispering. The vines hung low and thick and swayed slightly, even though there was no wind, and the ground was covered in soft moss that swallowed the sound of every step. Above them, small glowing insects drifted in lazy spirals, forming shapes and symbols that faded when watched directly, but returned when ignored. And Rhea felt the presence of the jungle growing stronger, not just in the plants, but in the air itself. Like the oxygen had thoughts and memories. She whispered to the scientist, stay close. Breathe slow, watch where I step, and don't panic. He nodded, but she could see the fear in his eyes growing as they walked into a space that felt wrong. There were no animals, no insects, no birds, no signs of life other than the plants, and even those were still too perfect, like they were posed and waiting in. The center of the clearing was the beacon, small and silver, blinking a soft red light tanned around. It were the remains of the last team, weapons smashed, gear burned, no bodies, just shredded clothing and shattered helmet. She moved toward the beacon, and suddenly everything stopped. The vines froze in midair, the leaves stopped swaying, even the light from the insects paused in. She realized the jungle had stopped pretending. It knew she was different. It knew she had made it all the way here. It let her come this far. Now it was deciding what she was in. She stood still, breathing slow, remembering what her grandpa said about storms and wild place. Didn't speak, don't try to control what can't be controlled. Let it see who you really are. She closed her eyes and waited. The forest shifted, felt it not in her ears but in her bones. A slow ripple like a wave moving through her body, and then the ground opened beside the beacons, low, not violent, like a mouth yawning, hole covered in glowing roots. Leading down into darkness, she opened her eyes. The beacon was still there. The trap was open into jungle. Waited. She turned and looked at the scientist. Is where it thinks it ends? She said. He stared at the hole, his voice barely a whisper. What's down there? She looked at the vines that pulsed like veins, at the trees that leaned closer, at the ground that seemed to breathe the jungle's mind. She said, the heart or the brain, whatever controls this whole place. And she knew what she had to do. She walked forward slowly toward the hole, every step careful, every movement calmed. Jungle didn't attack it, just watched. And when she stood at the edge, she turned back one last time. Take the beacon, get back to the ship. Tell them it can be beaten, but not with weapons. Scientists tried to stop her, tried to reach for her, but she had already stepped into the hole, and the jungle closed behind her, not with violence, but with silence, because now it wanted to understand. Rhea was ready. She didn't come here to escape. She came here to finish Ito, show the jungle something it had never seen before: patience, understanding, and the oldest trick in the book. The air was thick inside the tunnel, thicker than fog, thicker than smoke. It clung to Rhea's skin and filled her lungs with every breath. Like she was breathing memory instead of air. The walls were pulsing, slowly glowing faintly with veins of green and gold and blue, moving like blood through a body, like light through nerves. The deeper she walked, the quieter everything became. No insects, no wind, no sounds of vines, no shifting leaves. Just silence and pulse, silence and pulse. The ground was soft, not with dirt, but with something that felt like sponge or flesh, not warm but not cold either, and she walked slowly, letting her feet learn the rhythm. Her eyes stayed open, her hands near her side, her backpack still light but important. She had left everything behind, except her grandpa's journal, one water pouch, and a single firestone hidden in her boot. The jungle didn't like fire, but she didn't want to fight it. She just wanted to understand. The tunnel opened into a chamber, wide and tall, shaped like a dome, and inside she saw things she didn't expect, things that didn't make sense, and yet did, scattered across the room. Were broken helmets, shattered weapons, torn clothing, parts of old machines, but none of it was destroyed like the jungle had done before. Instead, it was laid out in patterns, set in circles or lines or shapes, like it was building something or telling a story. A story made from the things it had taken, and in the center was a mound of vines, pulsing gently, the same glow running through it as the walls, a heartbeat slow and steady. And Rhea stopped just short of it, standing still, listening and waiting, because she knew. Now this was not just the jungle, this was its mind, the root brain, the heart of it all. She closed her eyes and breathed in through her nose, letting her thoughts slow down, letting her memory reach back to earth, to the woods, to the quiet times with Grandpa, when she learned to move without being seen, to wait without being bored, to let the wild come to her instead of chasing it. When she opened her eyes, the vines had shifted ever so slightly toward her, not like an attack, more like a question. She reached into her jacket and pulled out her grandpa's journal and knelt slowly, placing it on the soft ground in front of her, and then stepped back and sat cross-legged, her hands resting on her knees. "It's what you wanted," she whispered softly. No fear in her voice, no anger. "You want to understand me, and this is how you can." The vines didn't move. She waited on. While she waited, the memories came, not just hers, not just human, but others. Flashes of images passed through her head, not clear but real, tall beings with silver eyes walking in this same chamber, placing crystals into the walls, speaking without sound, their hands glowing with energy. Then time flashing forward. Weapons, fire shouts, pain, confusion, and then nothing. Then the jungle waking up, lone and angry. She felt the loss, the confusion, the hunger, not for food, but for meaning, for order. And that was when she understood. Jungle didn't just hunt because it was a predator. It hunted because it was looking for something that made sense, something it could understand. It hated chaos. It hated it hated fear because it didn't know what to do with those things. It was a machine, or maybe a guardian. Maybe a test left behind by something long gone, and now it was broken, or confused, or waiting for orders that never commanded things. It killed it, didn't hate them, it just couldn't let them pass, because they didn't fit, they didn't follow the rules. But Rhea had followed the rules, old rules, forest rules, the kind that come from a quiet place. She stood slowly and took one step closer to the mound of vines, her heart calm, her breath steady, and she said, "I am not here to fight. Am not here to win. Am here to help you remember on." Then she turned and walked Away she didn't run, she didn't look back, she walked slowly. Out of the chamber, through the tunnel, and back toward the surface knowing. The jungle was watching and waiting, testing her one last time. She stepped into a wide corridor and saw what it had left for her a trap, but this time not. No pile of equipment. Drone half-buried a soldier's helmet resting on a stone awl. Placed in the middle of the path, obvious she stepped around it without touching anything, and nothing moved because this was the real test. Bait wasn't the gear, it was her reaction. She ran if she grabbed the gear, if she made noise, she would lose. She walked on and the vines above shifted slightly but did not strike. She passed the place where the beacon had been, was gone now. The scientist must have taken it good now. All she had to do was leave, but leaving would not be easy. The jungle still needed to decide, still needed to test. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a piece of paper, old and worn-torn from the journal one of her grandpa's final lessons. It read, "If you ever feel like the forest wants to eat you, sit down and listen harder." She sat cross-legged on the moss and listened. Dan slowly. The jungle began to hum, a sound not in her ears but in her chest, like a low voice saying something she almost understood, like the first time hearing music in another language. She whispered, "I hear you." And the jungle stopped, the vines withdrew, the leaves opened, the light returned on. Rhea stood and walked out into the open air. The sky above was brighter than before and the trees no longer leaned so close. The jungle wasn't calm, but it wasn't angry either. It was thinking, processing, and for the first time, it let her go because it had learned something too. She wasn't Pratt, she wasn't a threat, she was something else, and the jungle didn't know the word for it yet, but it wanted to. The sky above the jungle was hidden behind thick green canopies and slow-moving vines, and Rhea barely noticed anymore because the forest was all around her, watching, breathing, shifting with her every step, and she had stopped trying to look for clear signs or threats or enemies because she now understood that this jungle was not wild in the way people used to think. It was not just full of creatures or plants or poisonous roots, it was something deeper, something intelligent that moved like a mind stretching across miles of branches and leaves and roots, and it learned fast. She had seen it herself, how it responded to sounds, how it mimicked what it remembered, how it attacked things that acted in ways it had seen before. But now that she was moving in new ways, silent, calm, without fear, the jungle was slower to act, unsure and hesitant, like it was trying to study her from every angle before deciding what she was. Beside her, the alien scientist limped through the underbrush, his breathing shallow, his body weak, but his mind sharp and alert, and he kept glancing around like he expected the trees to fall on them or the vines to wrap around their legs and pull them under. But Rhea didn't move with panic. She moved like she was part of the jungle herself, slow, balanced, and quiet. They had traveled for another hour since leaving the ruined research station, and now the trees were taller, the air thicker, and the vines hung so low they had to duck to pass through them. And that was when she saw Ida clearing ahead, perfectly round, too perfect to be natural, and in the center a silver case shining in the filtered green light. She stopped immediately, her instincts alert, her breathing, even as she raised one hand to stop the scientist. "It's bait," she said softly. Stared at the case and frowned. "How do you know, B? 'Cause it's clean too." "Clean too, knew nothing else in this forest looks untouched. Not even the trees," she answered. He nodded slowly, fear creeping back into his eyes, and she looked closer without stepping into the clearing and saw that the grass around the case had grown in a circle around it, as if it were protected or untouched, and the trees around the edges leaned slightly inward like watchers, or perhaps like traps ready to spring. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small device, a simple audio lure, one of the few pieces of tech she allowed herself to carry, and she activated a short loop of soft human footsteps, then through the device into the clearing toward the case. It landed with a quiet thud and began to play for several seconds. Nothing happened. Then the ground near the case shifted. Day 8. Root exploded upward and struck the device, shattering it instantly. The scientist jumped back, breathing fast, and Rhea just nodded slowly. "That's how it hunts," she said. "It waits for a reaction, sound, movement, heat. It thinks in patterns, so we changed the pattern." She Stepped to the side, moving slowly around the edge of the clearing, never stepping. Inside, and placed another small device, this time a metal decoy shaped like a person's silhouette, lightweight and silent. She activated it, then threw a rock past it, so it would seem like movement this time. The response was faster for Vine's shot. From the ground, like spears wrapping around the decoy, crushing it, then vanishing back into the earth in seconds. Scientist shook his head in disbelief. It's so fast. How do we even fight it? We don't, Rhea said. We trick it. We waste its time. We make it guess wrong over and over until it gets tired or confused. That's not possible, he said. As if you think like prey, she answered. They moved again, slipping between narrow trees and ducking under low-hanging vines, and soon they found another. Strange sight, a pile of gear half buried in moss, arranged in a perfect triangle next to it, was a message scratched into a flat rock. It read, "We." Ran, we screamed. We lost. The scientist stared at it in silence, then whispered, "What are we doing here trying?" "Something different," Rhea said. They kept walking deeper toward the coordinates of the last team, and the jungle grew quieter as they moved, like it was listening again, watching, waiting, and she knew it was getting serious now. It had tried bait, and it had failed. Now it would try something else, something bigger. They came to a rise in the land, and Rhea crawled to the top on her stomach, lifting her head just enough to see what lay beyond. Another clearing wider than the first, and in the center stood a tall figure, not moving a person, or at least something shaped like one. It wore a torn uniform from one of the early teams. Its helmet cracked, its arms limp, but it stood upright, completely still, and around it the grass was flattened in a spiral pattern like something had circled it. Many times Rhea watched for several minutes, then spoke softly. "That's not a person, not anymore, you're sure?" The scientist asked Rhea to look at the posture too. It's perfect. No weight shifting, no movement, and the spiral. "Grass. It's been used as a lure, so the jungle is using our dead as bait." He said, "Door copies of them," Rhea said. She stood up slowly and raised both hands, showing she was unarmed, then took one step forward into the clearing. Nothing happened. She took another step, still nothing. She walked straight toward the figure until she was 10 feet away, and then stopped. She reached into her bag and took out her grandpa's old camping mirror, small, round, and scratched. She held it up and aimed it at the figure, letting the sunlight bounce off and reflect into its visor. No reaction. Then she threw the mirror, gently landing it beside the figure. Still nothing. Now she was sure it was a decoy made of plant material, wrapped in gear and dressed to look real but hollow on the inside. Just another trick to test reactions, to see how she would respond. She turned and walked away. The jungle didn't move. It was watching. It was learning. And that made her smile. Good, she thought. Keep watching, because I'm not going to play your game. They moved on, leaving the decoy behind, and found a narrow path leading between two massive trees, and on the other side they found something new, a nest of roots shaped like a bowl, filled with objects from past missions, cracked helmets, shattered drones, torn fabric, even pages from old journals and scraps of plastic and metal, and all of it was arranged in layers. Like a nest, like a memory bank. It was collecting. She realized it wasn't just hunting, it was studying them, trying to understand what humans were in now. It had found something. It couldn't predict her, because she didn't act like the others. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She didn't shoot or scan or shout. She walked and listened and watched and gave nothing away. On the jungle hated that, because it needed data. It needed noise. It needed patterns, and she was breaking all of them. They camped that night near a giant fallen log, and Rhea made no fire, just wrapped the two of them in thermal blankets and ate cold food. In silence, and as they sat together under the quiet trees, she told the scientist about her grandpa, about the old tricks, the simple rules like never walk faster than your own shadow, or breathe in time with the wind, or leave no trace. He listened quietly and then asked, "Why do you think this jungle is so afraid of you?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Because I'm not afraid of it." And then the ground under their bedrolls shifted, slow rise and fall, like breathing, and the forest whispered, not with words but with tension, with pressure, with weight, as if it was saying, "Jim's still herein, I'm still watching in." Morning came slowly inside the jungle. if it could be called morning at all, because the sun never reached the forest. Floor and light only filtered in soft and green and always changing, and Rhea opened her eyes to the sound of stillness, because that was how the jungle greeted her now. Not with screams or falling branches or attacking roots, but with silence and attention, like it was waiting to see what she would do next. And beside her, the alien scientist was already awake, sitting up and staring into the trees with wide eyes and quiet breath, and he looked like someone who had not slept, even though his body had rested. She sat up, wrapped her blanket, and looked at the path ahead, and without a word began to pack her things careful. Slow, no sudden movements, just like her grandpa taught her. Never rush in the forest, never show your fear, never let the wild think you are prey, and the jungle was more than wild now. It was watching her every step, measuring her choices, listening for mistakes, and yet it still did not move against her, which told her she was close to something deep and hidden, something it did not want to lose. The path today was different, not twisted and random, but shaped, carved almost clean with branches curving overhead like a tunnel, and roots parted just enough to walk, and she could feel it. This was a path the jungle wanted her to take, a test, maybe a trap or something even more dangerous. A conversation. They walked for hours, the trees whispering above their heads, and the vines twitching once in a while, but never reaching, never striking, and finally they reached a place unlike anything they had seen before. It was a clearing, but not natural. The trees here were tall and old, and their trunks were wrapped in vines that glowed with the softest light, and in the center was a stone circle half buried in moss, with strange symbols carved into the floor. And Rhea stepped to the edge and stopped. "This is not for us," the scientist said, his voice low, almost afraid. "This place was built, not grown." She nodded, because she felt it to something ancient, older than the jungle, older than humans, older than any species she had studied. This place, memory trapped in roots and stone, and the jungle had led her here not to kill her, but to show her something important. She stepped forward slowly, her boots pressing into the moss. The air was heavy with age and smell and sound that was not sound but pressure, and in the center of the stone circle was a figure curled like a statue, not moving, not breathing, covered in roots but not dead. A body preserved maybe, or a guardian maybe, or something else entirely. She knelt beside it and brushed away some of the vines, careful not to cut or tear, just move gently, and underneath was skin, not human but not alien either, smooth and metallic, and glowing faintly like something asleep and dreaming. When her fingers touched the symbol on its chest, something happened. The ground shuddered. Not a quake, but a heartbeat, and around the edges of the clearing the vines began to move, not attacking but unfolding like petals, and in the air a voice began to whisper, not through ears, but through memory, like an echo that had waited thousands of years to be heard. "You are not the first," it said, and she felt the words not as sound but as weight. She closed her eyes and listened. "You walk without anger, you breathe without fear, you hear without speaking, you see without searching." She breathed in slowly and replied in her mind, "I came because you were killing us. I stayed because I want to know why." The voice pulsed again, not angry, not sad, just tired. "They came before you. They came with fire and noise and fear, and we reacted as we were made to react, protect, defend, consume, isolate. We forgot why we were made, only that we had to keep the balance, and now we do not know if balance means silence or peace." Shy opened her eyes and looked at the face of the figure sleeping beneath the vines, and it looked peaceful. Not frozen, not dead, just paused. "What are you?" she asked softly. "First memory," the voice said, "and the last key, the guardian who taught the roots to think and the leaves to feel. But we forgot the words, we forgot the song, we only remembered the scream." And the Huntria looked around the clearing and saw that the trees were moving, subtly shifting closer, like they wanted to hear, like they too were listening. "I have a story," she said, and sat cross-legged in the center of the circle, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees, and she began to speak in a soft, calm voice, not shouting, not commanding, just telling the way her grandpa used to tell her stories in the dark woods on Earth, when the fire was low and the animals were quiet, and the stars above were cold and clear. She told the jungle about her home, about the way forests lived and died, about the way people sometimes destroyed but also protected, how they planted trees, built trails, listened to birds, followed tracks, taught children to respect the wild, not with fear but with care. She told the jungle about her grandpa, how he taught her to see without looking and walk without sound, and how he told her that every forest had a heart, even if no one could find it, and that the heart always listened, even when it said nothing. The jungle moved slowly, the trees shifting closer, the light growing softer, the air warmer, and the voice returned. Quieter now, more curious. "Why do you speak this to us?" "Because you asked," she said, "and because you left a trap with a question, and I answered with a story." The voice pulsed again. "Many. Before you failed the test, they ran, they screamed, they burned, they bled. I know," she said, "and I don't blame you for defending yourself. You are not like the others." The voice sadium still human, she said. "I still make mistakes, but I listen, and I learn." The jungle paused, and then the vines around the sleeping figure began to recede, curling like waves, and the body underneath began to glow brighter. And then slowly, slowly, it breathed. The figure opened its eyes, and they were gold like the jungle's veins. And it looked at her without moving, and she knew it was wake. It stood slowly, vines falling from its shoulders, and it spoke not with voice, but with memory. "You gave us something we forgot." She nodded reasonably. Figure stepped forward and placed one hand on her forehead, and for a moment everything stopped. She saw stars, planets, wars, peace cities, laughter, birth, death, forests, oceans, fire, and wind, and then she saw the first time this jungle opened its eyes and felt alone. And then she was back in the clearing, and the figure was gone, vanished like mist, and the jungle around her was quiet again, but not watching with fear now, with calm. Scientist stepped forward slowly, his eyes wide. "What just happened? We made peace," she said. "You spoke with it?" "No," she said. "I listened." And then the jungle parted, a path opening wide and sunlight shining through, and she knew this was the way out. They walked for hours, but the jungle did not attack. The vines did not move. The traps did not reset. They were no longer intruders. They were guests. When they reached the edge of the forest, the camp was still in ruins, the shuttle still broken, but the trees did not watch them now. They stood like sentinels, quiet and still. She sat on a fallen log and pulled out her grandpa's journal, opened to the last page, and added a new line. "Even the wildest jungle has a voice, if you learn to listen." The scientist sat beside her and said, "Will you tell them what happened?" "Yes," she said, "but they won't believe it." "Then why tell it?" "Because maybe one of them will listen, and maybe the jungle will listen to, and maybe next time it won't need traps, just someone willing to sit and hear its story." And then the wind blew soft through the trees, and the leaves rustled like a whisper, in the jungle said goodbye in its own way, but Rhea knew it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something new, because for the first time, the jungle had a survivor and a story worth remembering. The sky above the ruins was wide and bright, but it did not feel like safety to Rhea anymore. It felt empty, cold, open in a way that the jungle never was, because the jungle had listened. The jungle had tested, the jungle had remembered her, but this sky only stared down without care, and the broken ship behind her was a reminder that humans had come to this world expecting to conquer, and now they barely survived. The scientist who walked with her now spoke less than before, his eyes always searching the trees behind them, his steps careful, as if he still expected the jungle to reach out and take him back, but it did not. The jungle had let them go, and Rhea knew why. She carried the memory now. She carried the story, and with it came a responsibility she had not asked for, but could not ignore. Days passed before rescue came, a small scout vessel alerted by a silent beacon left behind in orbit, one that triggered when no reports came from the planet for too long. The shuttle landed with noise and dust and shouts, and the crew ran out weapons. Ray scanning the trees, expecting monsters, not silence, but the jungle did not answer, and Rhea stood calm as they surrounded her, speaking over each other, asking questions, demanding answers, and she gave none. Not yet. Not until they listened. They took her back to the main ship, a research cruiser in orbit above the planet, filled with white walls and bright lights and humming machines. Everything clean, everything controlled, everything opposite of what she had just lived through, and as they cleaned her up and checked her vitals and recorded every scar and mark, they still did not understand that she had not escaped. She had returned. The debrief room was small and cold, and the officers, who sat behind the desk, were dressed in sharp uniforms, their eyes trained to spot lies, their mouths shaped for orders, not questions, and they looked at her like a subject, not a person, and they began to ask, "Tell us what happened. What did you see? Attacked the camp? How? Did you survive? Where's the rest of your team?" She listened to them speak for a long time, and then she raised one hand and said softly, "I will tell you everything, but you have to listen without interrupting, because if you don't, then nothing I say will make sense." They frowned but nodded, and she began. I told them about the jungle not as a place, but as a presence, a mind, a memory, wrapped in roots and vines and silence. She told them about the traps not made from malice, but from logic, from rules the jungle followed because it had forgotten why it existed. And now, only new to test those who entered, she told them about the alien figure sleeping beneath the stone, the guardian or architect or seat of whatever the jungle once was, and how it had awakened just long enough to remember a piece of itself through her voice, through her story. She told them about the quiet, the patience, the waiting, the lessons her grandpa had taught her about how to survive, not with strength, but with understanding, not with fear, but with stillness, and how that stillness had been the key to survival, not just for her, but for the jungle tooth. Listened at first in silence, but then their expressions began to shift from curiosity to doubt, from doubt to disbelief, from disbelief to dismissal, and one of them leaned forward and said, "Do you expect us to believe that the jungle is alive?" "Not alive," she said, "aware, awake, confused, maybe broken, but not evil. And this guardian you saw, it woke up. Because you told it a story. It woke up because I listened first," she said, "because I didn't fight it or run from it. I gave it time, I respected it." Another officer scoffed. "So you're saying we shouldn't defend ourselves?" As Sim saying, "Your weapons are the wrong language," she said. "They speak fear, and fear only feeds the jungle." They talked among themselves, whispered with quiet voices, looked at screens and files, and then turned back to her. "You have no proof." "I have my life," she said. "I have my memory. And I have one witness." They brought in the alien scientist, and he told his version, careful and quiet. How he watched her survive when others died, how she moved through the traps without triggering them, how the jungle never touched her, how the trees opened for her, how the path led her not out, but in, and how she came back untouched, while others vanished, screaming. The officers looked uneasy now, because two stories matched too well, and neither story could be easily explained by reports or science or logic, but they still hesitated because truth was not always welcome, especially when it meant everything they believed might be wrong. Kept her under observation, gave her a room, fed her, questioned her, monitored her, and still she waited for someone to hear not just the words, but the meaning behind them. And after days, a message came, not from the officers, but from a council higher up, from the real decision-makers who had watched everything through screens and silence, and now wanted to speak directly. They called it a hearing, but it felt like judgment, a room larger than the ship filled with floating screens, faces old and young watching her like she was a puzzle. And they asked her again, everything again, and she answered again with the same calm, with the same story. And when they finished, one of them leaned forward and said, "What do you want, Tan?" She paused because she had not thought about that, not in those words. "Now clearly I want you to leave it alone." She said, "You want us to abandon the planets? I want you to give it time to remember itself." "What?" she said. "Because it's more than jungle, it's history, it's life. It's not just some wild land to tame," they whispered again, discussed among themselves. But she knew they would not agree, not yet, maybe not ever, because they were used to seeing worlds as resources, not stories. But still she had spoken, and now the story had left her and entered their ears, and maybe one of them would carry it forward like she did in the days that followed the ship return to orbit. But no teams were sent down, no weapons fired, no new camps built. They watched, only watched, and for the first time, the jungle watched back, not with violence, not with hunger, but with interest. And the silence between them was filled with something Nerys pecked one evening as she sat near the observation window, staring at the planet below. A voice came beside her, the scientist quiet and thoughtful. "Do you think it will ever forgive Yusji?" Shook her head. "I don't think it needs to forgive. I think it just wants us to stop lying to it, pretending we belong when we don't even understand what it is." Nodded and said, "What if others come and don't listen, then we teach them how," she said. "Like my grandpa taught me, and so the mission became something new, not to conquer, not to mine, not to harvest, but to learn to wait, to watch, and maybe in time to earn the jungle's trust the way." She had one story at a time, one silence at a time. She stayed on the ship, but sometimes she dreamed of the clearing of the stone, of the glowing vines, of the guardian's golden eyes, and she knew. The story was not over. It had only just begun, and maybe one day she would return, not as a survivor, but as a friend, and the jungle would remember her not as prey, but as part of the forest itself. The stars outside the observation window blinked in silence, cold and far away. But Rhea wasn't looking at the stars. Her eyes were locked on the planet below the green curve of the jungle world, still glowing faintly in orbit's shadow, and her breath caught in her chest, not because of fear, but because of what she felt, something shifting, something wrong, like a note out of tune, like a bird falling silent in the middle of a song. She pressed her palm to the glass as if she could reach through it, feel the roots again, hear the pulse of the earth, but all she felt was metal and distance. And in that moment, she knew something had changed. The ship had grown busy in the last few days, more than usual, people moving faster, voices clipped, and quiet orders passed between officers without explanation, and Rhea noticed the way they glanced at her. When they thought she wasn't looking, she noticed the way access to the jungle logs had suddenly been denied, even to her, the one who had survived, the one who had listened and come back. She noticed, and she waited, because that's what the forest had taught her: patience, silence, listening deeper than words. And then one night the sound came. Sharp, loud, sudden, not from the planet, but from the ship itself, a signal, a message bouncing through encrypted channels, and she followed it, not with permission, but with instinct, through the corridors, down to the maintenance decks, where no one watched, where few dared to go, because they believed nothing important ever happened there, and that was always a mistake, because what people ignored, the forest remembered. She found the terminal behind a loose panel she had discovered weeks ago, and the screen flickered to life with red text pulsing like veins across its surface. Not human text, alien script, jagged and glowing, and beneath it a single human word. Translating, and then the meaning came. "They are coming." She stared at it for a long time, heart beating like a drum, not because she didn't know what it meant, but because she didn't. Other ship was on its way, one not bound by treaty or research or patience, a private vessel heavy with weapons, fast and silent, a hunter ship, not as scholars. It had been dispatched in secret. Maybe by someone on Earth, maybe by someone on the Council, maybe even by someone here on this very ship, and it carried one mission: to break the silence, to breach the jungle, and take whatever secrets it held by force. Rhea ran not out of panic, but purpose, straight to the command deck, where the captain stood, surrounded by screens and advisors, and she didn't wait for permission. She stepped into the room and said clearly, and without pause, Aor being lied to. They turned, all of them, eyes cold, jaws tight, already defensive, before she even finished speaking. "A second ship is coming," she said, "armed, crewed by mercenaries. It's not scientists. They'll land within a day, maybe less. They're going to try and burn the jungle to the ground, and you all let it happen because you thought no one would notice." The captain frowned and said, "Where did you hear this?" "I didn't hear it," she said. "I felt it. We're guessing." Remembering, she said, "The jungle warned me. It felt the threat before we did." "This is madness," one of the advisors said. "A forest cannot send signals. It doesn't use signals," she said. "It uses memory, and I've been part of that memory now. I know what fear feels like from the inside, and the jungle is afraid you expect us to stop an operation based on a feeling. I expect you to choose what kind of people you are," she said. "Whether you want to be explorers or invaders, or whether you want to be trusted or feared, because once the jungle decides what you are, it does not change its mind." But they did not believe her. Not all of them. Not yet. and so she left them arguing among themselves and returned to her quarters, where the scientist waited, already sitting on the floor, already looking up at her like he had felt it too, and she nodded and said, "We have to go back down before they arrive. We have to warn it ourselves. That's suicide," he said. "If the other ship lands while we're there, we'll be caught in the middle. Better us than silence," she said, "because if we wait, then everything we learned, everything we earned, it will burns." So they went quietly without orders, just the two of them using the last shuttle still set for surface research, and when they entered the jungle again, it was different, not hostile. Not violent, but quiet. Like a breath held too long, like an eye watching from behind every leaf. And Rhea stepped forward and placed her hand on the ground and whispered, "Where back, and they're coming though." Vines did not move, but the trees shifted slightly, and the light around them dimmed. Not dark, not danger, just focus, just listening. And she told the jungle everything, not with words, but with memory, letting it feel her fear, urgency, her truth, and slowly the ground beneath them pulsed. Once, and then again, and then a path opened, not like before, not random this time, straight, direct, leading toward, the core toward, the deep place where the guardian once stirred. They followed the path, and each step felt heavier, not with weight, but with meaning, because now it was not just about her survival or understanding or peace. Now it was about choice. It's about protection, about whether a world built on memory could survive a future built on destruction. When they reached the chamber, the air shimmered with golden light, and the vines there had changed now, coiled tightly like muscles, like armor, and in the center, the stone figure was awake, not moving, not speaking, but aware, its eyes glowing brighter than before, fixed on her, and she stood tall and said, "You know what's coming?" The guardian said nothing, but the room answered with a low hum like thunder far away, like a growl from the planet itself, and she stepped closer and said, "We stopped them once with stillness, now we must stop them with truth." The vines moved and wrapped gently around her wrist, not pulling, not trapping, just connecting, and her mind filled with images, not memories, but futures. Fire falling from the sky, trees burning, people screaming, not just soldiers, but children and animals, and roots dying faster than they could retreat. And in that pain was a question: should we fight? She closed her eyes and said, "Nod, yet give them one more chance to listen, and if they won't, then I'll stand with youth." Vines loosened, and the light dimmed, and the path behind them closed, and Rhea turned to the scientist and said, "We have to intercept them before they land. We have to make them hear the story before it's too late." They left the chamber, and the jungle did not stop them. Instead, it lifted them one branch at a time, one root after another, carrying them to the surface, to the highest point of the canopy, where they could see the sky, where they could see the second ship coming fast like a dagger through cloud and flame. Andrea raised the old firestone, her grandpa's last tool, and struck it once against the stone beside her, sending a sharp echo through the air. And the jungle caught the sound and carried it outward, amplified it, made it deep, made it strong, a sound not of war, but of warning, a sound that might stop a ship or start a war. And as the engines of the hunter ship roared above her, she stood tall in the treetops, eyes locked on the descending fire, and whispered, not in fear, but in defiance, "This is your last chance." The sky cracked open like a scream of thunder, the hunter ship breaking through clouds, sharp and loud and full of fire engines glowing red beneath its belly, weapons, charged scanners sweeping for life and resistance, ready to strike before questions, ready to take before asking. And above it all, Rhea stood, arms raised, not in surrender, not in fear, but in warning, and her voice rose with the jungle, not loud, not angry, but ancient, carried by wind and memory across trees and leaves and roots that remembered everything. The command ship above watched it, all their screens blinking with alerts and confusion, their voices rising with worry as the second vessel refused to respond to any hails, refused to acknowledge any peace, refused to pause. And the captain, now pale, now still, finally saw what Rhea had meant, finally felt what she had tried to say, and he gave one final order, not of power, but of silence. Let it play out, let the forest speak. And It did as the hunter's ship lowered its guns. As its landing gear extended, as its shadow swallowed the treetops, the jungle opened, not in violence. Not in attack, but in truth. The vines parted, the trees bent, and a shape began to rise from the deep. Roots not mechanical, not human, but something. Older, something vast, a towering form of bark and earth and light. With eyes that glowed gold and blue and green, the colors of birth and memory and storm, it rose higher than the hunter's ship. Its presence making the engines flicker, making the weapons twitch not by force but by understanding. Inside the ship, the mercenaries saw the figure, and for a breath none of them moved, none of them fired, none of them spoke. They only stared, and in their silence the guardian reached out, not with hands, but with thought, and across every screen in the ship, a memory began to play. Not just one, not just Ria's, but thousands. The lives that had walked the jungle, the voices that had learned from it, the pain. And finally, the small, simple kindnesses it had been given by one single human who listened. Mercenaries looked at each other, their weapons now useless, their mission now empty, and one by one they powered down their systems and waited. Orders but for permission, and slowly the ship turned not away, but still and silent, hovering without. Threat and the guardian lowered its arm, and the forest held its breath. Then Ria stepped forward, not with a weapon, not with a message, but with her grandpa's compass, and she held it high and let it spin in her hand and said, "We remember we, here Wu, are not alone anymore. Anymore in the forest, move not in fear but in peace." The vines reached out and gently touched the landing gear, not to pull it down, but to hold it steady, to say, "You want to learn, we will teach if. You want to take, we will defend if. You want to belong, we will make space." Message traveled across the planet through the roots and winds and rivers, and soon every tree, every stone, every creature, small and large, knew the choice had been made, not by force, but by understanding. And in orbit, the command ship lowered its shields and sent its own signal, not to Earth, but to the stars. The jungle is alive. The jungle has spoken. We are not alone. And back on the surface, Ria closed her eyes and let the warmth of the forest wrap around her like an old friend, like a lullaby from long ago. And in that moment she felt her grandfather's hand on her shoulder, not in flesh, but in memory, in spirit, in roots, in sky and soil, and PCI smile, and the jungle smiled back. The light faded, the wind whispered end. Far away the hunter's ship left without firing a single shot. The forest sighed in relief, and the stars above watched. In silence on the story was complete, the end.